Hey everybody, welcome back to Frequency Freaks. I hope you all had a good summer break. I know I enjoyed myself. It was really nice having a couple of months off and not having to think about video production or anything like that. But we're back now, and we've got some interesting stuff for you today. We did have a couple of delays with this one, and I apologize for that. Completely my fault. I lost track of time, and it just got away from me, and that's the way it goes sometimes. Today we're starting off with a discussion about what makes for a good module. And JP King and Michael Brooker are joining me. And after that, we will have a couple of studio performances and a home studio tour. As always, if you want to reach out with any comments or suggestions, you can actually leave them in the comments below. We do read those. Or you can reach out through the website, www.freakfreaks.com. I'll put the link down in the description below. We're always looking for home studio performances. So if you're interested in contributing something, or you have an idea for a topic of discussion, something you'd like to hear about, just let me know and we'll be sure to get it in there for you. And with regards to performances, everybody is welcome to perform. You don't have to worry about being an expert performer or an expert musician to perform at Frequency Freaks. It's one of the things we pride ourselves on here. We've had many people choose to do their very first performance at a live Frequency Freaks workshop, and we don't intend to change that for the video series while we're not able to get together in person. We still want to hear from you, and we still want to see you perform, because it's really cool, and it's the best way to learn, honestly. Our next workshop will be on October 17th, and I think that's about it. Without further ado, I'm going to have Michael and JP join me, and we will get on with that discussion. Thank you both for joining us here. Folks, we have JP King and Michael Brooker with us, and I'll just do a quick introduction, and then I'll ask these guys to kind of elaborate a little bit. We're here having this discussion because JP made a really interesting post in the Eurorack forum on Facebook. And after reading that post, I thought, wow, that was pretty insightful. Some really good questions, and it started off a really good thread of discussion in that group as well. And it's all about what criteria makes for a good module. So just to introduce JP, JP is an educator, a student, and he's been dabbling in modular synthesizers for about 2 years now. Did I get that right, JP?
Yep.
And Michael Brooker it's been about 3 years for you, right, Michael?
Well, what are we at now? It's September. More like
2.5?
4.
4?
Yeah, 4. 4.5 actually. Because Mother 32, right? That counts.
Yeah, absolutely, it counts.
Yeah.
Pretty much any synthesizer counts in my book. So anyhow, we have Michael Brooker, and by day, Michael works for the wonderful company Bell Canada, which we all have a love-hate relationship with. Don't hate him for that, though, because he's actually a cool guy. He's been dabbling in modular synthesizers now for 4 years-ish. And one of the things that he's done that has really helped the community out is some custom manuals. And some of the manufacturers have even adopted these manuals as publications that they provide to people on their own websites. And I'll leave Michael to talk a little bit more about that. Michael, would you care to introduce yourself a little bit further and talk about that little project of yours?
Oh, sure. So I should start by saying that I have a musical background in more traditional musical genres, performance practices. I went to U of T, graduated 2013 in jazz studies, actually studying the trombone. And so I did trombone performance for 4 years at U of C Jazz, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And in the fourth year of that degree, I was sleeping at school a lot of the time in the lounge, and there were two lounges. I slept in the downstairs lounge, and tried to hide from the cleaning staff, so because we weren't allowed to stay overnight. But I lived too far away, and I couldn't spare the commute time in fourth year. So that was the beginning. And up until 2015, I was a jazz musician and running a band, and writing music and performing and things like that. But then for a number of reasons, I decided I needed a change, and I needed a drastic one. So I went fully into electronic music and electronic music production at first, and then got into hardware and synthesizers. And the path from there follows a pretty common one of, starting in the box in a computer in a DAW environment, and then getting disillusioned with that and having too many options, and then wanting to narrow my options with good hardware. So then starting to get into hardware. Then when you get into hardware, you, as you start to understand the different components of a synthesizer a bit more, and you try out different gear, then you want more control. With greater aptitude comes a greater appetite to explore, right? And so I bought a Mother 32 in, I think it was actually exactly 4.5 years ago. And, but I couldn't afford anything else until the fall of 2016. And because I didn't have a decent job, and I'm glad I couldn't afford anything else, to be honest, because what I learned with just that one box really carried me, and still carries me. And I still have the Mother 32 beside me in my rack, and I'll never sell it, because the sound of that filter is just fantastic. And those oscillators I can't recreate in any of the other oscillators I buy. But so go back to what you said, Paul. Starting in a formal musical education, I like, and just who I am, I like structure. I like graduated learning. And so modular grid is my best friend, and I think it's a lot of people's best friends, because we get to like test drive all our crazy ideas, and plan all the things we're going to buy, which is, half the fun, or much more than half the fun if you're not careful. We're just buying and selling things. But yeah, but my whole thing was, if I'm going to buy a module, I'm going to respect it, just like I respected my instrument in undergrad. And the idea is that I'm building an instrument, and that in a short period of time, there is an end to this buying. And once it's there, I may still watch YouTube videos about new modules. I might not, if I'm finding them too enticing. If DivKid keeps making me buy stuff because his videos are so good, maybe I'll just have to stop watching DivKid, but yeah, the idea was always that I'm building an instrument with this. And so if I'm building an instrument, I want to learn the component parts of the instrument. And I want to do that in as targeted a way as possible, because in my mind, if you do it in a very focused and targeted way, you actually spend a lot less time in the long run learning, and you get it done. And while you're doing it, you are applying constantly what you're doing, and sharing things constantly. It's not like I'm just reading a book for 3 years and then I decide to start making music. But anyway, during that process of learning each module one by one, I started to make these, I call them parameter grids. And particularly with digital modules, they're really just cheat sheets. I'll make just these grids in Excel with colors, and that basically try to turn, if it's a 10-page manual, I want a 1-page cheat sheet that says all of what the manual says, except maybe how to update the firmware, because who cares? You know, or I mean, you could do that. You do it once, you know, maybe twice. I don't need that in my cheat sheet. But so I did, the first one I did was actually one of the most complicated. It was for Disting Mark IV. And at that time it was, I think he had like 80 algorithms in there at that time. Now it's like 111, I think. Because I still update my parameter grid. And I just got a Disting EX actually. I'm waiting to get that shipped. But yeah, so started with that, and then did one on Platts. I did one on Metropolis. And you mentioned working with the manufacturers. I sent the Disting one to Andrew Osler, the guy, the Expert Sleepers guy, and he really liked it. He shared it on his Twitter, and I got a little ego boost from that. That was nice. And then I bought an Eventide. I did a few other modules in between, but you know, anybody who's interested, just ask me about a popular module, and I may have a grid for it if you want one of these cheat sheets. But I did one for the Eventide H9 to summarize all of the effects. I think it was effects, algorithms, and presets, every single one, into a 8-page grid, you know. And so that, my idea is I want to crunch down, if it's a 40-page manual, I want an 8-page grid. And I do this for me. I'm not doing this, but I share it at the end because, you know, why not? If other people can make music with it, go, like, it's great. But I shared it on a couple of the websites, and then I think maybe he's lead product developer, or maybe he owns the company, I don't know. This guy, Tony Agnelli at Eventide, his assistant sent me a private message, said, we're really impressed with what you did, and we'd love to talk to you. And so one thing led to another, and he wanted to give me a call. So he called me from New Jersey, and he said, Mike, we love what you did there, and you know, we're just a small team of engineers, and we hate making the manual. And I said, I know. Who develops a product, and then once it's finally done and out and perfect, wants to write the manual, right? But it's so important for users because they don't know it like you do. And you know, even if you make a manual really detailed, then it's too detailed, and then it's boring. It puts people to sleep, right? So it's this fine line that I've kind of learned in my sales career of developing different templates for how to send quotes to people and things, because Bell doesn't really give me quote templates, or if they do, they look really bad. So I just make my own, and I'm thinking, what would I want to see if I'm the customer, right? And so most recently, I worked on the Erica Synth drum sequencer, and that was great because I got to work with Codec. This guy, his real name's Rivo, but he's like Erica Synth's demo guy. When you see them at Super Booth and stuff like that, he makes all the cool patches and stuff, and it was great. And it was the first time I actually got paid for a job like this, and so it was a really big thing, and I really hope to work with them again because they're great guys, and I can't say enough great things about their equipment. You know, Erica Synth stuff, just like IntelliGel stuff and Mutable, you know, and countless other manufacturers I'm sure we'll touch on. They all just have such beautiful and unique things to say. And I'm really glad to have been able to contribute in my own way, and I hope to continue doing that into the future.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it's actually been really cool watching you develop the style for these. and seeing how people use them and get benefit out of them as well. Um, it's been something that uh, that gives me a little sense of pride in our little frequency freaks group here that we've got, that we're contributing to the global knowledge, if you will, of everybody else. So yeah, well done. It's really a good thing that you're doing there. So
But I don't know where I would have been. Uh, I don't know, especially early on, but but now more than ever too. I don't know, like without the community that you built, Paul, and that you continue to foster through Toronto Sound Festival and through the monthly hangouts that we do. It's just been such an incredible learning environment to be in. So thank you for what you continue to do in building this community.
it really is my pleasure. I get to watch everybody perform. I get to hear some great music. I get to see people learn and improve over time, and that's something that's really become really important to me. Moving on to the topic at hand now. So, what criteria makes for a good module, JP? We'll let you start it off because you wrote the original question on the forum that got everybody going,
Yeah.
and that kind of spawned this conversation here. So give us an idea of where you were what you were trying to get at when you asked.
Yeah, so maybe I can tell a little bit of my origin story as well to contextualize this, which is that I came into modular not as a musician but as an artist, and not connected to a synthesizer community. Instead, I'm one of those fools who stumbled upon too many good videos on YouTube and fell in love. And as a result, I feel like I've kind of been wandering a little blindly through the modular forest trying to find my way. And that's meant that I've spent a lot of time watching tutorial videos and reading people's user guides, and reading forums. And I also started off with Mother 32, learned that well, and then realized that I wanted something more, and I got an O Coast and I started to play with that, and fortunately I found a harmonic oscillator on Kijiji, and then I needed a case for it, and then I stopped learning one module at a time, and I tumbled down this hill, and when I got up at the end, I found myself with a case and a half of fascinating stuff, and I'm in the process of trying to learn it all and individually at the same time. Um, so, in that journey, as I mentioned, I spend a lot of time on forums reading, like, is this filter the one that I want? Is that oscillator the right sound? And then I'll go and kind of cross-reference people's descriptions and opinions with what I can listen to and sound samples and all that. And what started to become clear to me after a lot of this is that people love their own opinions, right? And you get on a forum and someone's like, "Oh, this is the best filter ever. That other filter's garbage," and you're like, "Is that true?" Well, no, that's just your opinion. Um, and and I started to realize that that people's subjective opinions kind of get tossed around and accumulated in these forums and discussions, to the point that they start to, objectively or supposedly determine, like, what is a good module, what's a snoozer, what to look past. Um, and so at a certain point, I started to wonder, like, how do you evaluate a good module? And now that I have a handful and I've been buying them on the used market and then reselling them. In fact, I met Michael for the first time in a subway station. I bought a planar 2 by IntelliGel from him. And it's always a funny moment buying.
I'm not meant to.
It's always a funny moment buying a used module, because I'm like, why are you selling it? Is it no good? Do you not like it? it stinks? Why am I
I
buying
had
it if you're selling it?
I had to get used to the used thing too, because I don't usually like buying stuff used, but in modular it retains its value so well, you know, because people take care of their stuff, and and most of this gear by now is really well built. You know, we're not in the 90s anymore with like the early modular thing where there was no reverse power protection and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stuff's
Yeah.
well built now, so.
Yeah. So, you know, I just constantly found myself like trying to get an idea of, is this thing going to do what I want it to do? And I know that the underlying ethos is that these modules are capable of almost anything. And it's really the larger patching system that brings it about. But, you know, as I'm sure all of us can attest to, trying to find your own sound, your own voice as you build an instrument is both one of the pleasures, but also one of the challenges. So with that, one morning, I woke up and made my coffee, and suddenly it dawned on me that, almost like Michael was saying before, I could like make a spreadsheet with all of these criteria, and I could run, you know, my modules down in rows, and then I could create a rating system, and I'd be able to, you know, just run a sort and a couple filters and whatnot, and I should be able to kind of almost mathematically calculate what the superior modules are and the other ones.
How did that work out for you?
Well, I realized that that probably wasn't going to work because there's too much sensual, indescribable pleasure in these modules that I didn't know that I could calculate them down in that rational way.
Well, you can't, because the trouble is that you change, and so
Right.
you're going to be applying weights to things that will have no basis in reality in 3 months when you actually learn how a 2-pole filter differs from a 4-pole. You know, like, because we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, and so our priorities change.
Yeah.
And so that whole weighted approach assumes that you are in a vacuum and incapable of learning anything more about modular. Maybe if you're Richard Devine, you can do that, you know, because he's already had 40 or 35 years with synths and is a master of his craft.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us here on Earth, you know, me in 6 months, I don't know. I mean, I'm really gonna try, and now I have a big enough case with enough flexibility in it that I think I'm just gonna stop subscribing to certain YouTube channels and just say, okay, or if I'll watch a new product demo, like think about how can I do that on my system, and I know I can.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I've been really attracted to the idea of like a manufacturer specific system. In fact, you know, I fell in love with modular when I first learned about Buchla, and in many ways, like the music easel is this holy grail in my imagination, and I just long for the day that I don't know, I like get some insurance windfall and can buy one or something. I don't know how that's ever going to happen, but
Get hit by a bus, get some disability.
slip and fall this winter.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you know, I've had an enormous amount of fun, you know, building this instrument. In fact, I'm like falling asleep dreaming of wires and patching things up and thinking about possibilities. And, you know, I think the first time that I like fully comprehended Cold Mac by Mannequins, I was like, whoa. And I spent like 3 days tripping out on it, ordered it, and it's been too challenging for me, and I haven't made use of it the way that I had dreamt I would. So that brings me to thinking about criteria. And Paul asked this question, what were my criteria for a good module? And I don't know that there's a hierarchy for them, and I could speak to each one, but I'll just kind of, let's go through a run through of what I had listed in this Facebook post. So first and foremost, playability Is it fun to play? Is it immediately accessible? I'm here to enjoy the instrument. Um,
I'm going to let you pause right there, because for me, that is the most important thing. I'm not somebody who's going to set up my system and just let it run. I don't do generative patching.
right.
I set up various smaller patches within my system because the nature of the people that I play with is improvisational. And so I need to be able to change quickly into another feel, into another type of sound, whether that's turning a filter to adjust the timbre, whether that's adding some FM modulation to adjust the timbre, and or whatever else it happens to be. But for me, that playability is essential. And it's actually one of that and the sound is are the two main things that drove me to building up a 5U system, which unfortunately it's off the camera. You can't see it here, but it's right beside me. I can reach out and touch it right here. But
Yeah, whatever.
but that is the thing that drove me that. And if you look behind me, you can see that I have a lot of stuff behind me. And one of the things that I do to help keep the creativity happening is when I'm going to either play by myself, jam by myself, or I'm going to jam with somebody else, I will select what instruments I'm going to use from two or three, most four. Right. My most recent setup that I've been using a lot has been the Sciat Lombardi stack behind me with Coco Quantus, Sidrax organ, and Plum Butter. But just a little past that, I have a Lyra, and underneath, and that goes into a Bastel time delay, and those things are, you know, I've been jamming with those now for months, and I really haven't used much else. Um, a little later on, when we get to the point where we have some performances, I did a studio performance for this month's workshop, and it's a combination of those instruments plus the 5U system. The main reason being is because I've never featured the 5U system in anything that I've done for Frequency Freaks before, so I figured it was about time. Otherwise, I would have just stuck with those.
Yeah, so I
Yeah, I
think
think
You can go on now, JP, if you want. But that playability is and accessibility. I have turfed modules. They're too menu divey. They're too obtuse. I can't get to them one way or another.
yeah,
Um, or I can't. They just don't feel natural for me to work with.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good point, and it brings me to the second criteria, which is sound. Does it sound the way that I want? And in a less experienced moment, hearing you say um, the lyra and the thyme as a recipe works really well. Like I would go and then be like, oh, that's a good recipe. I should go look that up. And I'd watch videos and be like, is that going to be what I want to make? So, trying to find the sound, and it's so challenging. I wish that more people made like really banal videos of modules that just like explored the full range of like timbral capacities, things like that.
you'd never watch that. Nobody watched that. It'd be like 10 hours long, and it would be like here's the frequency range of the sawtooth, and now here's the reverse saw.
To be honest, I like the idea of the video manual.
Yeah, it'd be useful for sure.
Boring.
You'd have to make it fun, but
Yeah.
Actually, DivKid does a really good job of that.
yeah.
He does. He compresses it down, but he covers the most essential aspects, and then you can almost use his videos as a video manual, and
Oh, I have. Yeah.
and,
So
and jumping off point to start your own explorations of a module.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then form factor ends up being a big one for me. I come from a graphic design background. I'm not the most dexterous person, so do I like touching it? Does it look good? Is there space to get my fingers in there? That probably speaks to playability.
Can you read it in the dark when you're performing?
Yeah, and interestingly, on this point, I know a lot of people kind of crap on Make Noise, and yet there's something amazing about how like obfuscating their design is. At first I hated it, I couldn't stand it, and then as time went on I was like, that's kind of amazing, because intuitively I'm just memorizing jacks and placements, and I'm not fixated on actually trying to read the details of the faceplate. But I feel like they're the one manufacturer that succeeded in pushing legibility into creative territory. Otherwise, I like things very clearly labeled. Like the Buchla design sits top in my imagination.
So there's Heidi pointed us to a thread on Muff Wiggler that posed a question about brand philosophies, and people started posting their one-word lists of what the different manufacturers mean to them. And I'll just read off Make Noise, because Make Noise does tend to be one of those that's a bit more controversial. And the one list has Make Noise as independent.
Yeah,
It's pretty accurate.
yeah.
The next list down has Make Noise as flashy and discordant for the sake of being flashy and discordant. So,
Oh, not a fan.
um,
Not a fan of the design.
Strange panels that look like an angry toddler drew on them.
yeah.
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 And some people think that's really cool, and other people just can't get along with it.
As a designer, I didn't like it, but from a playability perspective, it's forced me to learn the module in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
to kind of to memorize its like topology.
Yeah, and I mean, to make up for that obtuseness, I know people who have gone out and bought aftermarket faceplates
Yeah,
for the Make Noise modules so that they can actually read them.
yeah, yeah. I'm guilty of that. Um, so maybe the next one in the list is function. What can it accomplish? How much functional or sonic range is available? And this is probably like where maths gets touted as like the best first module. It's like a Swiss Army knife in your system, right?
Wow, that best people are touting maths as the best first module.
Well, it's like universally agreed online.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that.
I wouldn't wish maths on a beginner.
No.
No,
But they could get a lot out of it, though. I mean, you just press the cycle button and you turn those knobs to the left, and like if you can find the outputs with little beginner's knowledge, because that's easier said than done. If you can find the outputs just by plugging things in and trying stuff over and over, and again with the reverse power protection and the quality that things are made nowadays, you're not going to melt the thing if you plug an output into an output like you used to. But yeah, you can make an oscillator out of it. You can get some weird stuff if you just mess around, but you will have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah. It was confusing.
Yeah, I mean, if we're picking a beginner's module, right? I would as the very first thing to get. I mean, both of you started with a Mother 32.
Yeah.
I've recommended
Semi-modular.
Yeah.
and the Behringer Neutron.
It's actually a pretty sweet little machine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one's actually really nice. And go figure, they designed it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one they got creative on that one.
Yeah. Finally, at last.
No, but yeah, semi-modular to start with. I wouldn't suggest anything else, because again, and also with economy too, because most of us when we're starting, you don't start with $5,000 to drop you know, you never really have, well, at least I don't, like I think, you know, middle Canada, middle America type person, you know, you maybe have $600 that you can justify spending and then gradually paying off and then regretting that you spent it, but you make so many cool sounds.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, okay, next on my list, I should be giving these as numbers. Number 5, system relevancy. And this is when, you know, you start to move beyond those baby steps. You've grown from that mother 32 to a more adolescent stage. So what role does the module play in my specific system? And, you know, at one point I realized, taking a kind of like West Coast entry point and approach, that I had like no filters. And I was like, oh, but filters do so much. And I can still filter a folded wave. And now I have like 5 filters. And I'm like, oh no, which one? And just yesterday I was looking at another one and I was like, maybe that's the one I need. But then I realized they're all doing relatively similar things. There are, you know, small.
I have one for sale. It's right there.
What is it?
That's a Verbose dual 4-pole.
Oh, interesting. I was looking.
Yeah, that Verbo stuff sounds so good.
Yeah, I was looking at a U Jove, little micro Jove.
Oh, cool.
But then I was like, is it too acid squelchy?
Oh, if you're struggling for HP, you know, the Verbose is not the one to get.
No, no.
No verbose, really, if you're struggling for HP.
Yeah. Yeah. So then maybe I jump to number 7, size. Is it worth its HP? You know, the Verbo stuff, and again, coming from the Buchla design philosophy, was make space for playability.
Yep.
Right? At some point, I was like, oh, microplats, that's great. Oh, it's inexpensive. It was the worst 6 HP of my life. Like, you know,
Because you're just like, you know, yeah.
it was a nightmare. And I was like, this thing sucks. It sounds cool and there's a huge range, but it was just way too small.
Yeah, all the controls become touchy because you don't have enough throw on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This seems to be the common complaint amongst people about Eurorack, right? And why those who can afford 5U swear by it. Or
Honestly, if you were gonna do it and start with just one modular format, 5U on a module by module basis is probably less expensive than Eurorack at this point.
really,
Yeah.
oh, that's dangerous to learn now. Okay, number 6 on my list. Surprise. Does it surprise me? You know? Does it do unexpected things? Is it ripe for experimentation, or is it really straightforward?
That could be both a pro and a con, depending on who you are.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
I mean, for you and I, we like to experiment, and you know, having that surprise can be a good thing, particularly when you're just learning about the module and having it surprise you when you're doing stuff on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe in a performance situation, you don't necessarily want that, or maybe the people you're playing with can deal with that. It all depends on where you are and who you're with, and you know, are you playing solo and can you deal with that, or not? And Michael, I haven't heard you. I've heard a lot of your demonstration stuff that you've done, but I don't know that I've actually heard a lot of your music. But just knowing you and the way that you are, I suspect that you're a little bit more of a control freak. So having those surprises while you're performing may not necessarily be a good thing for you.
Well, it's coming from a compositional and arranging background in jazz, where improvisation was and is central to my existence as a human being, but also more specifically in music. But it needs to be in context, and it needs to be within a broader framework where this is the thing that's being improvised, and it's being improvised under these conditions, because real creativity happens under restriction, you know, and if there's no restriction, then you just have a brown soup, you know, then there's no specificity to it. So yeah, I like to know what's going to happen start to finish roughly, but it's not art if you know exactly what's going to happen. And it's not performance if there isn't a bit of danger. But I was going to say that with figuring out a good module, it can be useful to zoom out and figure out, why am I building this case in the first place? Like, do I want to, is it going to be a fun hobby for me that I do after work? Do I just, and then do I want to make all the sounds, or do I want it to be like a band, you know? And you talk about surprise. And that's one thing that I love so much about my system, is that it's an agreement that the machine and I have. I do some things and it does some things, and it takes me to places that I could never have gone by myself. You know, you get into a patch that is, once you get into sufficient complexity, it's sort of like machine learning or deep learning, where if you get enough different probabilities happening at once, it starts to almost feel like it's thinking for itself, you know, like something sufficiently complex with interlocking events that don't line up, you know, and you're like, how did you know I was going to do that? It's kind of eerie that way, but that's what keeps us hooked, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just, you know, specifics about certain modules. As we were talking about the surprises, one module comes to my mind for that, and that's clouds. And I love clouds. I love the sound of it. I love what it does. But the original firmware, if you start playing around with the feedback in the original firmware, it gets out of control so quickly. And you know, if you're into washes of uncontrolled noise, that can be a really good thing. But if you're into having that, but having some control over that, it was really, really hard to control. And when I updated the firmware to the Parasites firmware, it brought all that under control. I could take it out of control when I wanted to. I could bring it back under control when I wanted to as well. And I did have a couple of performance situations where it got out of control, and I just had to shut it down, and it was a rude interruption to what I was doing. And that's not necessarily good in performance. So I was quite happy with the Parasites firmware, and it's one of the earliest modules I bought. I still have it. I mean, Maths I think was in the original purchase of modules that I did as well, and I still have that.
Yeah, well, and you talk about performing a lot, you know, and that was the other thing I was going to mention. I only mentioned half the story. Like, are you building your case as a hobby to invite friends over and maybe take the odd Instagram video, or are you trying to play out? Because that'll really impact your choice of equipment. And if your goal is to play out, you need to figure out roughly what kinds of sounds do you want to make. And of course that's allowed to change. Everything's allowed to change, but you know, do you like generative music? Do you like trance? Do you like techno? Do you not like dance music at all? That's fine. Do you want to sample rock music and like make reimagined versions of like Led Zeppelin tunes on your modular? You can do that, you know, but if you can figure that out early on, if I'm talking to a beginner, then I can show you the modules you should get over time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've even seen some people do some jazz tunes
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
and
So, I mean, I think that that element of surprise and its counterpart control ends up being kind of the fascinating process, the fine line that we walk in playing with modular, right?
yeah,
Um, like you said, Michael, like if there's no surprise, then it's not art. There's not much creativity at play there, right? If it's all surprise, potentially it's no fun or disturbing to the ears, right? Um, so I actually think I want to go back a criteria because you're both offering some good thoughts here. And this question of system relevancy, what role does it play within my specific system, and really thinking about system building, building by case, is a curious one, you know, because I first started out with I bought a Make Noise 7U bus case, and then I got a skiff, and then I got a second skiff. Now I'm going to get rid of those skiffs, and I've got an IntelliGel case, and and I'm constantly kind of dreaming up these module combinations that you know, have different larger overall trajectories or functions. You know, the one that's very rhythmic, the one that's very washy and ambient, and I know that those can be achieved, you know, in multiple ways, probably with the same things. But I'd be curious to hear from both of you what you have taken into consideration when trying to build an instrument.
Want to
yeah.
go first, Paul?
Sorry.
You go ahead first.
All right. So you can look at this case right here behind me, and some of you who are very sharp-eyed might be able to recognize some of the modules in that case. But I also have another case of modules that's just beside it. That other case, I actually had before I had this portable case. And right now it's basically a storage unit for modules that I'm not using at the moment. Um, Not modules that I want to get rid of, just modules that I'm not using at the moment. Or sometimes I will pull them into play with other things if I happen to need those functions. But that case behind me, I haven't touched it since February. And what's in it. When I say haven't touched it, doesn't mean I haven't played it. I haven't touched what's in it. I haven't changed what's in it since February. But there was a very specific reason why I put those modules in that case together. And the reason was because the band I play with, the Canadian Electronic Ensemble, went down to do a week-long residency at Carnegie Mellon University. And in our rehearsals, it had become pretty clear that a lot of the other people in the band had introduced a bunch of analog into their sound that they didn't have before. And so I was doing that analog thing in my case there when I played modular with the band. And I just figured, you know, that's probably too much modular. We need some contrast with that. And so that case is full of all digital sound makers right now. And
The
they're all,
black one,
sorry?
the black case.
Yep, the black case.
Yeah, that's your performance case.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
then that's my performance case. And depending on, again, as I'm selecting what I'm going to perform with for any given performance, if I decide, okay, I'm going to do a Eurorack performance, then I will think about what modules I want to perform with, and I will arrange that case accordingly, and things will get swapped out.
Mhm.
And you know, talking about swapping out modules, I think it's important again on the idea of restrictions to well, I should preface this by saying that most beginners, when they see a setup like yours, Paul, they get intimidated and they think, how much must that have costed you? As if you bought it all in a week, right? As if it was all acquired over a 10-day period, and you're a millionaire.
It's like that price tag at the bottom of your modular grid, and you're like, oh dear Lord.
Yeah, and then even worse, some maybe more cynical people would think, is this all just a flex? Is this just a different kind of car guy meetup where everybody, you know, or like you guys are probably all into Swiss watches too, aren't you? You know, like, because it's, and maybe there is an element of that with some people, but certainly the ones that have stuck around over the years and that I've learned from are in it for the real thing.
Wow, that sounds like a really good place to end things. Um, it's been a real pleasure having you guys along for this conversation. I hope everybody out there has enjoyed it. As much as I've enjoyed being here, and I can tell by the looks on your faces that you guys have obviously enjoyed this as well. It's been a real
Glad.
pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And you know, we'll see each other in person again, hopefully one day in the not too distant future.
That sounds lovely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
Yeah, you too.
We'll end it there.
Hey gang, it's nice to see you again. I hope you've had a great summer and that COVID hasn't been getting you down too much. I've been busy around the studio, and I thought I would give you a little tour, an updated tour on my setup since the shutdown. So without further ado, here it is. So one of the things that I'm most excited about, the recent additions, is a Moog E1 guitar. Now you might ask yourself, what is a Moog E1 guitar and what does it do? Well, it was a product, excuse me, I think relatively short-lived. It was produced, I think, back around 2008 to sort of 2012. And essentially what it is it's an electromechanical feedback guitar. So it's a traditional guitar, but rather than just having the pickups essentially record what the strings produce, the pickups actually provide active electromagnetic feedback to the strings. So if we turn up the feedback here, we can hear that the strings will actually start to self-resonate. See if maybe we can get it to go. Now, I'm not sure if you can hear that or not, but essentially what it does is the pickups actually provide resonance, cause the strings to resonate. They provide feedback pulses, and essentially what it does is it creates infinite sustain. So essentially you don't need to pluck or strum the guitar at all, and it will actually essentially play itself. Some of you may be familiar with EBOs. It's kind of a similar kind of principle, except it's considerably more active, which is great for me, by the way, because I'm not much of a guitarist, but this thing produces an amazing array of resonance and harmonic content, which is awesome to pump into the Eurorack stuff. Next on my COVID studio list is my old Creamware Prodigy. So I pulled this out. I've had this for a number of years, but I pulled it out of storage and set it up, wired it in. What it is essentially is a 6-voice Odyssey. It's a virtual analog synthesis emulation of an Odyssey, but it's quite faithful. It was produced in the early 2000s, and the company that produced it, Creamware, did a number of other boxes. They did one that was a Mini Moog emulation. They did another one that was a Prophet 5 emulation. I've actually had most of their devices at one point or another over time, and actually the Prodigy is my favorite. I've actually lined it up and programmed it identically, sort of set up an identical patch with one of the later generation Odysseys, and the sound is remarkably similar. The technical head of the company was a bit of a cranium, and he was very, he worked long and hard to make sure that the waveforms and the output of the synth actually was quite faithful to the original. In any case, it's like having an awesome polyphonic Odyssey, and it's actually one of my favorite synths. Next, I've kind of expanded my simple streamlined setup, which I had produced last winter, in order to kind of study a few modules to get to know them reasonably well, because I have several other rack cases that are full of modules, but I just don't have enough time to get to the bottom of them. So I figured by singling out a few and putting them in this enclosure here, I could kind of get focus on them and get to know them better. In any case, as things are want to do, I sort of decided to make it more and more complicated so I could produce more and more things. I added a monome Norns, which is essentially a super collider, a little Linux system in a box that runs super collider, and there's a lot of community scripts for digital signal processing and synthesis and that kind of thing on it. So it's essentially a sort of an infinite range of synthesis and signal processing tools, all in a very, very small form factor. In fact, it even runs on a battery. It's so portable. It connects to all of those great monome interfaces like the grid, the arcs, and the 16N fader bank. which is fantastic. Lots of control capabilities. Of course, I picked up the latest Michigan SynthWorks 16 slider, sort of revision to the 16N, which is great. And interestingly enough, I decided to pair it with the rather awesome little Arturio Micro Freak, which does all kinds of wonderful things and actually works as a beautiful little keyboard for the rig. So this whole micro setup here is actually capable of producing in and of itself a lifetime's worth of sound and interesting explorations. Next, in a flurry of sort of insanity, I picked myself up an ASM Hydrasynth, which is a wavetable synthesizer, and unbelievable design workflow to it. They've sort of instantiated the voice architecture. They've got a block diagram of the voice here with all of the different envelopes. It's got 5 envelopes, 5 LFOs, 3 oscillators, what they call mutants, 2 mutants per oscillator. Anyway, this thing's an incredible powerhouse. You can basically move your way through up to 8 different waveforms in each of the oscillators. Actually, the first 2 oscillators, the third one is a single only. It's got beautiful filter and really expressive arpeggiator. And one of my favorite aspects to it is it's actually got a pretty decent set of Eurorack CV ins and outs. And I've actually found that using it as a modulator for some of my Eurorack stuff has actually worked really, really well, because I can actually predict using this waveform screen here. I can actually get a decent sense of exactly what kind of what the wave shapes are of my modulators. So moving on from the Hydrasynth, in a fit of absolute insanity, thinking that must be the end of the world, so therefore I might as well have as many toys as I want to go out in style, I picked up an Iridium, a Waldorf Iridium, which is a 16-voice wavetable synthesis box. It actually does so many different types of algorithms. It's got FM in it. It's got so many different things. Sample playback. It's got direct-to-hard disk recording in it. It's just a whole universe of sound creation and sonic design. I only got it a couple of days ago, so I haven't really had a chance to play with it too much yet, except to check out a few hundred of the roughly 7,000 sounds that it can contain. It sounds amazing, but these days what synthesizer doesn't sound amazing? It has a few cool design features. I think the one perhaps that I enjoy the most at the moment is the fact that it's actually got a VESA mount, like a monitor mount on the back of it. So I actually have it attached to a swing arm, so I can move it. Let's see if I can get it to swing out of the way here. I can actually adjust its positioning up and down and swing it, sort of move it around, so that if I want to, in front of my composition workstation, I can kind of adjust it and sort of bring it in front of me. I find increasingly that ergonomics are a critical component of my workflow. If I'm having to bend over something or it's uncomfortable to use, I find myself using it less and less. So actually having a lovely tabletop box like this that can actually float sort of right in front of you at waist height really makes all the difference in the world. Anyway, I think that's about it for now. I'm sure I've got a lot more toys that I can show off, but I hope, as I said, I hope you're all really well, and I really miss you guys, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you face to face again really soon. And I hope you keep well, and we'll talk soon.